What's up, Flannelverse? We're back for Thursday Night Football. First game of Week 3 tonight. Second show that I am doing on it here in the Flannelverse. Looking forward to breaking this one down for a second time. We have the Patriots at the Jets. Should be I don't want to call it a fun game, but a fun showdown slate with two low-scoring, good defenses, slow-paced offenses. I think this could be a fun showdown slate, even with teams that maybe are a little bit less exciting to watch. I think some of these can be some of my favorite showdown slates. So looking forward to breaking this one down once again, and appreciate you guys showing up early. Appreciate you, Baldy and the Oaf, the hero of the Monday slate, came through with the news that Britton Covey was going to be what was warming up with the starters last week. That was very clutch for a lot of people who I know won big last week, including Hockey Freak Sean, who had a big win last week with Britton Covey in his lineup. So I appreciate you, Baldy. Of course, Hockey Freak Sean. We love to see it. By the way, Hockey Freak Sean, one of 3 people now, by the way, who using the Flannelverse avatar on DraftKings. I have not widely spread the avatar, but if you want to use the Flannelverse avatar, you of course are more than welcome to. You can find it in the Discord. So in the link in the description of this video, you can find the Flannelverse Discord if you are so inclined to use it. No pressure there. I know some other places have some great offers for things you can get for free if you use their avatar. So no pressure. But if you wanted to use the Flannelverse avatar, you can find that in the Discord. You can always DM me. I'll send you the image. Happy to let you use it. At some point, I think I will have some kind of a giveaway for people who have won using the Flannelverse avatar. Haven't figured out the exact parameters of that. Maybe minimum $5,000, maybe size of the contest, figuring that out exactly. But if you want to use it, you can find that in the Discord. We're going to go in this show game by game. Again, quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, look at defenses and kickers, and then I'll take any questions, build a couple lineups at the end. And we'll use fantasy points data. We'll look through roto grinders, all of that crutches. I know you hate the defenses, you hate the kickers. Jets defense, it might come in super high owned tonight. So I definitely get that. All right. We'll start with some quarterbacks here. And while you're coming, please do like the video. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, would appreciate that. Helps out quite a bit when you do subscribe to the channel. All that good stuff, interact, comment under the video. All of that is very helpful. 2 quarterbacks are Aaron Rodgers and Jacoby Brissett in this game. You can see here fantasy points has been projected for 15.6 fantasy points for Aaron Rodgers, 11.2 for Jacoby Brissett. I think that is going to be pretty close to the standard around the industry. Looking at the flex here, Aaron Rodgers 14.77 at Roto Grinders, Jacoby Brissett 11.72. So pretty close around the industry on the 2 quarterbacks. Fantasy points doesn't have the ownership projection, so we go here to Roto Grinders to look at ownership projections. Jacoby Brissett at 34% projected flex ownership, Aaron Rodgers at 40% projected flex ownership. This is an interesting spot. You don't usually see quarterbacks super low owned. These are definitely relatively low owned for quarterbacks on this slate. They come in even lower owned in the captain spot. So I will show you that as well. Looking at the captain ownership for the quarterbacks, we have Jacoby Brissett at just 6% projected ownership, Aaron Rodgers at just 7%. I think other places have it even a little bit lower than that. Regardless, I really like that ownership on these quarterbacks, particularly in the captain spot. I don't feel like it is the most likely outcome, and I'll give my my show caveat. What's up, Petty? I'm talking about large field GPP. So all of my analysis, for the most part, a lot of it you can obviously apply to other contests as well. When I'm giving you the usage stats, most of the information that I'm feeding you is applicable to all different types of contests. But my takes on how I'm using that information is all geared towards large field GPPs. That's where I'm playing. I'm only playing in contests with hundreds of thousands of people in them. Typically, sometimes just tens of thousands, but I'm usually playing large field GPPs. So when I'm giving you my takes on how I'm using the information, it's usually geared towards large field GPP. So I want to give that caveat. But because these quarterbacks are coming in so low owned, I do have interest in both of them in the captain spot. I think that they will be relatively low owned there. I did not say either of those things, Justin. Corley and Baker, I don't think I'm on either of them tonight. Justin just trolling me. Aaron Rodgers always going to be stacking him regardless of where I have him in my lineup. Um, if I have him in the captain spot, Aaron Rodgers is a 0 in the run game. I saw 0 total rushing yards so far this year on 3 carries. Other people this morning were citing 1 yard. Regardless, Aaron Rodgers, not somebody that you want to run out there without any pass catching options. When I have him in the flex, sorry, when I have him in the captain spot, I want to have multiple pass catching options. We've talked about this before. It's just the scoring dynamics on DraftKings. Really hard for a non-rushing quarterback to be the optimal captain with just one pass catcher, because if they're funneling it too much to one pass catcher, that pass catcher is probably going to outscore the quarterback. So you'd rather have multiple pass catchers in the flex. If the quarterback spreads it around, they're more likely to be, the captain that you need on the slate. Um, Now this is closer. This is still trolling from Travis Petty, but I don't think that is. I think that's closer to what I actually believe. I think 5-1 stacks are viable. I don't know how many actual 5-1 Patriot stacks I'm going to do. It's really tough with the way the projections are on this slate. We just have very few high projected players. So that the 5 players who project really well on the slate, the 2 quarterbacks, so Aaron Rodgers, Jacoby Brissett. You have Ramondre Stevenson, and then Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson are the 5 players who actually project well on this slate. Adam, I talked about this morning. I do um, Showdown write-ups. I've been doing them for a couple of years now, and I usually do like a stud section, and it's usually 8 to 9 players, and I say you should play at least 3 of these players in your lineup. We don't have that on the slate. We have 5 players who could be considered studs, and that's including Jacoby Brissett, by the way, in the players that we're classifying as studs. This is a unique slate in the lack of star power. So I think that this is a slate where you could theoretically get away from that rule. I thought about changing it in my article from 3 to 2, play just 2 of these players. I didn't get there. I stuck with 3, but I don't feel all that strongly about it. If you wanted to just do 2 players from that group, I think that would be totally fine. And I guess you could get there with the Patriots. You play Jacoby Brissett in the captain spot. You've got Ramondre in the flex. You just play Breece Hall and then go with other Patriots pass catchers, Hunter Henry, a couple of the pass catchers. Yeah, you could do a 5-1 Patriots stack. It is. I was looking at the ETR data earlier. Going to be super low, and the 5-1 Patriots onslaught going to be insanely low owned tonight. So I do think there is some merit to it. Just hope that the Jets are not able to move the ball. And honestly, I've looked at defensive rankings around the internet. Some places have the Patriots actually better than the Jets, as a better defensive unit than the Jets. Both very, very good, both top 10. So notable that the Patriots are so good this year. Although they did give up some big plays to the Seahawks last week. So yeah, I like the quarterbacks just fine in the flex. I think I'm probably not taking a big stand there. I think the biggest difference that I will make is I'm going to be higher on the quarterbacks in the captain spot, which don't always love to do. You look at like the rates of how often quarterbacks show up in the winning lineup in the captain spot, particularly non-rushing quarterbacks. It's not that high. It's usually lower than the amount that the field is playing it. But we've seen it recently. We've seen quarterbacks just going super low owned in the captain spot. I think people have over adjusted, so I might lead into it a little bit and play some more of those. What if Jacoby Brissett throws 2 touchdowns? Might play some more of those with Jacoby Brissett in the captain spot. And Aaron Rodgers, same thing. You can make the same case for Aaron Rodgers. The number is honestly closer than I thought it would be, looking at those 2 in the captain spot. Aaron Rodgers, when you play him in the captain spot, you're probably still playing like a chalkier lineup in general, because there are going to be a lot more people that have Garrett Wilson, obviously. Not sure how it's going to break down with Alan Lazard and Mike Williams, but I think you're going to be funneled into a somewhat chalkier lineup with Aaron Rodgers. Whereas I think if you play Jacoby Brissett in the captain spot, all of the Patriots pass catchers are so low owned that I think you can still do it. All right. Any other notes on the quarterbacks? So yeah, Aaron Rodgers, I always said, Jacoby Brissett. I didn't go over the stacking with Jacoby Brissett. Not a great runner, but he's kind of a mid-level runner, averaging 19 rushing yards per game in the 2 games so far. Averaged about 15 when he started 2 years ago, rushing yards per game. He is a big guy, 6'4", like 235. I don't know that matters, because I think that they're still going to be. No, I think it does matter. They have Ramondre Stevenson there, who is also pretty solid goal line back. But I think it makes it more likely that Jacoby Brissett could rush one in from the 1 yard line. So I think even though he's definitely not an elite rusher, he is kind of mid-level. I think I'd be more inclined to play Jacoby Brissett. I don't know that I'd ever play him naked. I think you could play him naked in the flex, just because there are going to be lineups where you might want to play some lineups that have just one Patriot in them. Maybe the one Patriot touchdown is a rushing touchdown. Maybe he spreads the ball around to all of his many mediocre pass catching options. So I think that you could play Jacoby Brissett naked in the flex. I would be inclined to still stack him up in a majority of my lineups. And if you have Jacoby Brissett in the captain spot, always stacking him up with at least one pass catcher. I don't think he has enough rushing upside to get there without someone else coming along for the ride. But I think you could play him in the captain spot with just one. Still prefer multiple in general. So that's where I'm at with the quarterbacks. Not taking huge stands, other than probably going to do some more onslaughts with the quarterback at captain than the field. Running backs, and maybe I'm just going to refresh this real quick, make sure we have the most up-to-date projections, because I have this page still open from this morning. But it's all going to start with Breece Hall. Just projects extremely well, better than anybody else on the slate by a pretty wide margin. As you can see here, Breece Hall projects more than 5 fantasy points better than Ramondre Stevenson, who is the second best projected player on the slate. So I think it all kind of starts with Breece Hall, and it really comes down to his role on the team. And here, I'll change this to running back. If you look at bell cow reports, and I'll move it to the Jets, just really elite usage for Breece Hall. Week 1 actually was probably lost some snaps in the blowout in the Niners. We had Aaron Rodgers came out of that game. Backup quarterback came in. They kind of went away from their starters a little bit. So 16 carries in week 1. But what you really love to see is 8 targets on 64.5% route participation. Breece Hall is just completely game script independent. He's going to be in there in games where the Jets are playing from behind, as long as they're still in it, and he's going to be in games where the Jets are playing from ahead, as long as it's not a complete blowout. So as long as the game is fairly close, no matter which side the Jets are on, Breece Hall is probably going to be in there. You might even prefer it if they're playing from behind, which is rare for a running back. But just elite usage through the air and on the ground. 14 total targets so far this year. Worth noting also, and this is something that I listened to the ETR show earlier, and Adam Levitan pointed out that Breece Hall may have lost some snaps in the most recent game due to getting a little bit banged up in the course of the game, and Braylon Allen may have benefited from that as a result. So I had not seen that Breece Hall was kind of banged up in that game, but I thought that was an interesting note, that maybe some of what he lost in that game was due to being banged up in the game. So maybe he would have an even better role than what he has so far. But either way, just an elite role for Breece Hall. Projects extremely well in this game. Hard to get away from him. I'll probably have Breece Hall in over 70% of my lineups, I would guess. And if you look at the field, Breece Hall, 49% projected ownership in the flex, and then 25% in the captain spot, which honestly, if you just look at the projections here at captain, the differences, that you can see the gap in the flex, but in the captain, it's like Breece Hall, 32 projected fantasy points in the captain spot. Garrett Wilson, 25, Ramondre Stevenson, 24, Aaron Rodgers, 22, and then it drops off a cliff. Even Jacoby Brissett down to 17 projected fantasy points in the captain spot. Big drop off after that to Braylon Allen at 12. So it is kind of harder to get to some of the more tertiary options on this slate, because we do have several value options. So price isn't as big of an issue. I guess if you're trying to play all of Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Ramondre Stevenson, maybe it gets a little bit tough, but I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue. So I do think that in a lot of my lineups, I probably will be just jamming the chalk, playing a lot of Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Ramondre Stevenson. And then outside of that, maybe some of the guys who are just have the big play upside outside of those three. I actually think, Hunter Henry, well, we'll talk about the other positions once we get there. But I think that the ownership is kind of warranted on Breece Hall, I guess is what I'm saying, in the captain spot, because he just projects so much better than everybody else. And what you really need at the captain spot generally is going to be those blow up games. Obviously, in a really low scoring game, maybe nobody has a blow up game and maybe you don't need it. But generally, you're kind of looking for big scores from your captain, not just good point per dollar scores. So Breece Hall, yep, elite. Ramondre Stevenson, only $400 less expensive than Breece Hall, and projects about 5 fantasy points worse. I do think it's worth noting that, and I have this split up, but on the season, if you look at expected fantasy points for Ramondre Stevenson, and you can't see it here because I have split up by game, but if you remove the teams, just sort by expected fantasy points overall. Ramondre Stevenson actually has the second most expected fantasy points on the year of all running backs in the NFL. Also, an extremely good role here for the Patriots. Already has 46 carries on the season. That's kind of insane. 8 targets, obviously not as good as the 14 that Breece Hall has received, but really solid role here for Ramondre Stevenson. Again, that pie that Adam and I talked about earlier today, the pie on the Patriots, the running game is enormous. They run the ball so much. They are in neutral situations. They have the highest rush rate in the entire NFL. So they want to run the ball. They're trying to establish it. And Ramondre Stevenson is the RB1 here. The other nice thing about Ramondre that is a little bit different than Breece is you do need to play at least one player from both sides of the game. And I think it's going to be kind of a common thing that people will play 5-1 Jets onslaughts with Ramondre being the bringback from the Patriots. And that kind of makes sense. You just look at the usage. Ramondre is extremely obvious. So on the one hand, it's like, okay, he doesn't need to outscore Breece to be the one that you need in the winning lineup necessarily, because you need to play somebody from both teams. So if they're pretty close, neither of them goes off, and you can only play one stud. Potentially, there's an extra out there for Ramondre to be the one you need instead of Breece. But in general, that's I don't think that's going to be a factor all that often. He doesn't project nearly as well point per dollar as Breece Hall. Generally, probably a lot of the time, you're going to be playing both of them. I think Ramondre is a very strong play just because of the role. It is a tough matchup, obviously, with the Jets. Really strong defense. But you got to play somebody from the Patriots. If you go to Ramondre Stevenson as your one, that makes sense. He has a great role in this offense, the best role in the offense by kind of a significant margin. Beyond Breece Hall and Ramondre Stevenson, Braylon Allen, I think I'm back to largely a fade. Like, I don't want to full fade him, but I do think Braylon Allen is getting a little bit steamed up because of the 2 touchdowns in the last game. And I wanted to be off it. Adam and I talked about him. Like, I can't completely, because I do think he is pretty good. He's 8 carries for 41 yards so far this year, over 5 yards per carry. Also 5 targets on the year. He has dropped 2 or 3 of those, which don't love that, but he took one in for a touchdown. Also, could have that goal line role. We haven't really seen it yet. We haven't seen it. We haven't seen him take a goal line carry yet, but he is kind of a big bruising back that you might expect that from. So I get all of those positives for Braylon Allen, but I also think there's no guarantee that he has any kind of a role here, or much of a role at the very least. I think Breece Hall is, they're focused. They want to get the ball to Breece Hall. So I don't think it's a really safe role for Braylon Allen at this point. And it hasn't been like a huge role for Braylon Allen anyway. The role that he has had, just looking at the stats from the last 2 games, he had just 1 rushing attempt in week 1. He had 7 in week 2, which, yeah, it's good to see that he's taking on more of a role as a talented rookie who we think should get involved at some point. He may have been taking on more of a role. It also could just be, as Levitan kind of pointed out, it might just be that he had a bigger role because Breece Hall was banged up in game. We don't really know for sure. If he does have this role of 7 rushing attempts, 10 routes run, 4 targets, that's fine. It's still not like that's a great role for a player that is 5,200. So I think it's going to be a stay away for me from Braylon Allen, because we're projecting him for a pretty significant amount of ownership. And when I say a stay away, I probably mean I'm down to, I'll have maybe 10% Braylon Allen. I honestly, if you wanted a full fade him, I think you could. 27% projected ownership for a player that doesn't seem to have a huge independent role. It seems too much to me. I would rather go to some of the other options who are getting lower ownership at lower price tags, who have, I think, more definitive roles, or at least similar roles there. Yeah, I think max 15 seems fine on Braylon Allen. That seems fair, but it does feel like a spot that I want to be underweight there, because he could really do not much at all. And he's 5,200, probably needs to score a touchdown to pay off that price tag. Was pointed out this morning. I thought it was a good point. He probably does get a lot of run in a blowout. But again, just getting a ton of run in, it would be the 4th quarter, most likely. You rarely get the backups coming in the 3rd quarter. At 5,200, I don't think one quarter of elite run is necessarily going to be enough to pay it off anyway. So I don't know. It feels like a little bit of a thin play for me, or at least it feels really thin relative to the number of people who are expected to play Braylon Allen. So to me, that is going to be a light stay away spot. Scares me a little bit, but I think that it just feels like a spot that the field is getting out ahead of it a little bit. Playing 27% at 5,200. Antonio Gibson, more interesting to me. He's 3,600, so easy to pay it off. Doesn't project all that much worse than Braylon Allen. Looking at the ownership on Gibson in the flex, 20%. So lower ownership, cheaper. I would say I think I'm more confident in the role for Antonio Gibson. Just looking at his past couple of games, has 18 total carries on the year. Strangely not really involved in the passing game. I think that's going to change at some point. He usually is. I mean, he's a former wide receiver, as everybody knows. Just 7 routes on the year, 1 target is pretty surprising for Antonio Gibson. You kind of drafted him, in best ball as, okay, he's going to be the pass catching back. If they get behind, they'll throw it to Antonio Gibson. He's going to thrive in those roles. Has not been the case at all. So far, it's just been the Ramondre Stevenson role. Antonio Gibson actually more involved in the running game than you would expect, less involved in the passing game. Maybe that's just a matter of, again, the Patriots are trying to run the ball. And Ramondre Stevenson already getting 46 carries. So you don't really want to give him more than, this 25 is probably a solid cap on a running back most of the time. We saw Josh Jacobs get 34 last week, I think, but generally you don't want to give that much more. And when you have a very capable backup in Antonio Gibson, makes sense that they would give him the rock at that point as well. So I like Antonio Gibson as a play. Obviously has elite contingent upside as well. I think if anything happened to Ramondre, who has got a lot of run already this year, a lot of wear and tear on that body, I think that would be good for Antonio Gibson. I think he would be a great contingent value in that case if something happens to Ramondre. We saw Allen. He had a couple drops already in that last game, maybe even 3. It was 2 or 3. I don't remember. I didn't count them, but didn't look great in the little bit that I watched of his film from last week. I watched all of his plays from all of the snaps from the last week, and he had at least 2, maybe 3 drops in that game. I do agree with that though, Ryan. He is big. He's 20 years old, if I remember correctly, and just a beast. So could be a great goal line back. Maybe he does score a couple at the goal line, and that would just destroy me. But I'm willing to take that risk at this level of ownership. He would be a play I would love if he was coming in at 3% ownership, even at this price tag. I'd be like, all right, I'll bet on him just being the guy who scores at the goal line. But at 27%, I think it's kind of it's thin relative to the amount of people who are playing him. All right. No other running backs to touch on. I guess we should look at the ownership on. I showed you Gibson 20%. I think that is pretty solid. Jermichael Hasty would be just a blowout run kind of guy. He's only 400, so he could pay it off in blowout time. But I think I'm not going there. Maybe in a 150 set, I would have a few shares get to 2% or something, but not somebody that I'd go out of my way to get to. Wide receivers, as you can see here, big gap. So it's Garrett Wilson, big gap down to Allen Lazard, Mike Williams. Actually, I will refresh this one as well. Make sure that nothing's changed there. Yep, not much has changed. So Garrett Wilson, 16.5 fantasy point projection. Allen Lazard, 6.7. Mike Williams, 6.6. All Jets at the top. Realizing that I need to look at inactives. Do we get any interesting inactives? I have been checking before the show, but did not get to it before this one. I don't think that I was expecting any major inactive news, but I will just look it up really quick to make sure that there's none of these like wide receivers where it might come into play, where maybe one of these Patriots wide receivers is inactive, which would not be that shocking. But let me just take a second here. And I am nervous that my internet is not great right now because I'm not able to load images. You guys still hear me, see me just fine? Yeah, CJ Mosley out. It's interesting. Very strange that my internet is not. I can see the tweet saying Patriots inactives, and yeah, images are not loading for me right now. So I guess I'll stay away from that. Okay, good. You can still hear and see me. I'm nervous about my internet right now. We are having some rainstorm issues here, but I think we're good. I think we're good. I just can't see it. Looks like there's no major inactives on the offensive side. So Garrett Wilson, yeah, 16.5 fantasy points. I mean, you know what you're getting with Garrett Wilson. He is the top dog here for the Jets so far on the year. You can see the route participation very strong. Actually, I'll show for the full year here. Garrett Wilson, 89.1% route participation, leads the team by a solid margin. 17 targets. I could see that even increasing for Garrett Wilson. He's just a very clear wide receiver one on the Jets. I think the price tag is fair. He's one of those 5 players who projects really well. I don't know if there's that much more that needs to be said about Garrett Wilson. I like him in the flex. I like him in the captain spot. It's you know who he is. You know that he's a strong play. He projects really well. You're going to have him in a lot of lineups. The more interesting conversation then begins with the secondary receivers for the Jets. And we saw Allen Lazard in week 1, 90% route participation, 9 targets, just an elite role in week 1. In week 2, did take a step back. So Allen Lazard, week 2, 67% route participation, 4 targets, more in line with what was maybe reasonably expected of Allen Lazard, even in week 1. But Mike Williams recovering from an injury coming into the year. They said they were going to, his usage, the coach's quote before week 1 was like, we're going to ramp him up similar to Breece Hall, which is like, okay, early in the year, he's not going to get a ton of reps. They will go up week over week. And you can see here, week 1, 12.9% route participation. Just ran 4 routes in week 1, up to 54.5% route participation, 18 routes in week 2 for Big Mike Williams. And he's coming in at, let's take a look at whether the ownership has changed at all. But yeah, 17.5% ownership for Mike Williams as he's already taking on a bigger role. He's a big, solid player in general. I mean, he's a little bit older now, so who knows if he still has the same juice that he has had throughout his career. But Mike Williams has always been a very good player when he is healthy, a great end zone threat. Hard not to love Mike Williams if he is going to be taking on a bigger and bigger role. So at 17.5% ownership, a role that is increasing. I really like Mike Williams at 6,200. And then Allen Lazard, 23.35%. Honestly, that seems pretty fair to me too. Maybe he continues to lose his role a little bit more as Mike Williams's role increases. I don't think I would set a rule to like max one of those guys. I think that it's totally fine to have both Allen Lazard and Mike Williams. But Mike Williams, for the most part, his playing time comes at the expense of Xavier Gipson. So we can see that looking at the week 1 versus week 2 numbers. Gipson in week 1, 67.7% route participation, week 2, 12.1. So if you just look at, full season, looks like he has pretty solid route participation. Break it down week by week. He lost most of his role last week to Mike Williams. I would anticipate that will change. Of course, the thing that makes me the most nervous is we are on 4 days rest. So it's possible that the Jets don't want to play Mike Williams a ton again, twice within 4 days. They knew obviously that it was going to be a Thursday game coming up for them. So maybe they factored that into how much they played Mike Williams in the last game. Maybe they do continue to ramp him up, but maybe it does give them some pause in terms of increasing his route participation even more. So that would be my biggest concern with Mike Williams. But even at 50% ish route participation, I think I'm into it at low ownership because he can just score a touchdown. And at his price tag, 6,200. I said with Braylon Allen, probably needs more than just one 1 yard rushing touchdown to pay off 5,200. But also maybe not, because this could be a very low scoring slate. And Mike Williams, I think, is a little bit more likely than Braylon Allen, if he does score a touchdown, to also have 3 other receptions for 20 yards. And those PPR points add up in a hurry. So I think that he is at lower ownership. I think he's a stronger bet than Braylon Allen. So I do have interest in Mike Williams. Gipson going to be a fade for me. A little bit nervous about it just because, he's been out there both games. Even last game, he was out there a little bit. Maybe plays a bigger role with Mike Williams on 4 days rest. But I think just reading the trends, it seems more likely that Xavier Gipson continues to take a backseat to Mike Williams. All right, I'm going to take a sip of water here and then continue. Yeah, I think that's reasonable, Sean. But it's just he's coming in so low owned that I'm willing to do it anyway. All right. Any other Jets receivers? I mean, Malachi Corley, you might be inclined to play some. Didn't even play in week 2, looks like. So yeah. Oh no, I read that wrong. In week 2, he did have ran one route. So that's what we've seen. One route for one target for Malachi Corley. Actually, was that I'm wondering if that was a first read route, which would be kind of interesting. Are they trying to? Yeah, his one target was a first read target in a 150 set. If you want to bank on like a Malachi Corley gadget play in the red zone, maybe he scores a touchdown, could pay off his price tag pretty easily. I guess that's probably the best case you can make for Malachi Corley. He's 1,200, would play in a blowout most likely. He's a rookie. Kind of a gadgety kind of player who could come in the red zone, but fairly thin. Again, has run one route so far in his NFL career through 2 weeks. He was the first read, so if you want to go there, you could. I'm probably not playing him in my, I think, like 35 lineups again. I think Malachi Corley is going to be a fade because we have a lot of other pretty low-owned Patriots options. But you know, I've played worse plays than Malachi Corley in the past. So if you want to play him, go right ahead. Pop Douglas. So getting to the Patriots receivers, Pop Douglas would be my favorite. He projects the best, as you can see here. He's 4,200. Just looking at his receiving stats, he's had the best role so far on the Patriots, I would say. I mean, not counting other positions, but among wide receivers, Pop Douglas leads in route participation at 75.4%. Just 3 targets. Don't love that. He is the slot receiver. We talked about this a little bit on the morning show. Crutches brought up that that slot receivers against the Jets are kind of a thing. I looked into it a little bit more, and I don't think that I missed anything. It's possible that I did, but yeah, Pop Douglas 85% of his routes from the slot. I think that generally what it comes down to, the reason that we talk about that being a thing is you've got DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner on the outside for the Jets. So then, you know, anybody else on the Jets is going to be a weaker defender than those two. So you kind of funnel targets to the middle of the field to avoid DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner. That would be the slot receiver. So a little bit more funneling there. And if you look at so far on the season, percentage of targets going to the slot, the Jets do allow the 11th most targets by rates, at least. The 11th highest target rate to slots in the NFL. So it is a little bit of a slot funnel for the Jets, a little bit of an easier role. On top of all of that, I mean, so you look at the role here, he has the best role on the team in general, at least in terms of route participation. He plays the slot. That seems to be the weakest part of the Jet secondary. And then the other narrative little bump that I talked about earlier, that is true. He complained after last week. Reporters were asking him, like, have you been able to shine this year? And he said, no, not this year. I was able to shine last year. I haven't had the opportunity to shine this year. They're not getting me the ball. Kind of complained about his role on the team. And Jacoby Brissett then was asked about it, and he said, I'm glad that he's complaining about it. I'm glad that he's frustrated. He should be frustrated to not get the ball, but he needs to know that it's a long season. We will get him the ball, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that exchange kind of, I like that, you know, on a showdown slate. I do lean into narrative sometimes. I'm buying that narrative of maybe Jacoby Brissett wants to get him the ball a little bit more after he complained about not getting it. Not exactly like the veteran star player where it's like, oh yeah, they're going to get him the ball this week. There's definitely no guarantee. Could go the exact opposite way where Jacoby Brissett just says, screw you, I'm not going to get you the ball. But that would be the same thing we've seen so far. So not a concern. Not a huge drop off is possible for Pop Douglas, but maybe he does get a little bit more opportunities here after complaining after the quarterback saw. So, you know, you look at just the role on the team, the narrative, the position he plays, all of that points to Pop Douglas as my favorite receiver on the Patriots. Very much could fail though. Just no. I mean, that's true of basically every player on this slate. No guarantees in this very low scoring game. There's not going to be a ton of plays run in general with Aaron Rodgers milking the clock every single play. Great defenses. But I think that I like him. I think he has the best opportunity here. And looking at the projected ownership, okay, it's actually, I think, gone up a little bit. I think it was closer to 15% earlier, now up to 22.5% projected ownership in the flex. So hate that it's gone up, but still think that's reasonable. Still think he's probably my favorite receiver on the Patriots. I'm going to refresh here because we're seeing some blanks in this. Okay, that did it. Let me remove captains again. See if anything's changed here. So sorting by projected ownership. Yeah, Pop Douglas at 22%. KJ Osborne at 13% is kind of interesting. Tyquan Thornton 9%. Let's get through the rest of the Patriots receivers. So again, Pop Douglas is my favorite of the group. After Pop Douglas, I think Jalen Polk, probably just because I think he's the best. I think he's probably the best receiver on the Patriots. Also not a terrible role for Jalen Polk. 62.3% route participation so far on the year. Only 4 targets. He did have a touchdown, and I believe he was the first read. He's been the first read on 3 out of his 4 targets. So solid enough role for Jalen Polk. If you look at separation score metrics on fantasy points, he is also really good. Like best on the Patriots by a while, by a wide margin. That's funny, Drew scaring me here. So yeah, the role is pretty strong for rookie Jalen Polk. I think he is a very strong play. I think he's probably my number 2 on the Patriots. But then the reason I'm doubting that a little bit is I do really like the KJ Osborne, the way his role has changed from week 1 to week 2. So I might put KJ Osborne there because he's not getting much ownership at all. And if you look at his role from week 1 to week 2, and this is such a small sample that I don't want to read too much into it, but we saw Jalen Polk stayed steady. KJ Osborne moved up from 45% route participation in week 1. He did see 6 targets on 45% route participation. That makes me think that maybe he earned a little bit of a bigger role. The fact that he was targeted 6 times in a pretty limited role in week 1, we see him move up to, in week 2, 59% route participation. Only saw 2 targets in that game, so don't love that. If you want to follow the narrative of earning targets gets you playing time, 2 targets is not great, but 59% route participation. I like that he earned a little bit of a bigger role in week 2, whereas Tyquan Thornton, we saw a drop from 72% down to 56%. So we actually saw a little bit of a flipping there for KJ Osborne over Tyquan Thornton. Such a small sample size, such small numbers here, 13 and 19, 18, 21. Like it seems like it's a little bit of a tenuous, maybe I'm reaching for a narrative there, but makes me think, if KJ Osborne is not going to get any ownership, I'm a little bit interested there in KJ Osborne. Javon Baker, I'm wondering if I need to think more about Javon Baker. What do we think about Javon Baker? Is he in play? He's only played one. He played in week 2. Ran a total of 1 route in week 2. Is this a spot where the Patriots are going to want to use him more because all of their other receivers are? That's my assumption about Javon Baker. He's a late season guy. I honestly have not given a ton of thought to Javon Baker. I haven't read it. If you guys have read anything on Javon Baker, let me know, because I honestly have not been thinking about him because he hasn't done anything so far on the year. Okay, not in play without Drake. Yep, I like that call too. Okay, I think we can probably safely avoid Javon Baker. But just he's done so little. The projection's so low that I didn't really think about it. But he is a rookie that maybe at some point gets a little bit more work out of nowhere. Everybody in chat is agreeing that he's a better fit with Drake May. Probably not going to get much here. So I don't think we have to worry about Javon Baker. So yeah, I think Patriots receivers, I probably rank them of just the wide receivers. Pop Douglas, probably Jalen Polk still, just because I think he's more talented, followed by KJ Osborne. So I guess right in line with projections. I do like KJ Osborne is 3,200. He took on a little bit of a bigger role. I do like him as a contrarian option. I like him better than Jalen Polk. He's getting a little bit more ownership than Jalen Polk. Polk coming in, or sorry, than Tyquan Thornton. Thornton coming in at 9%, KJ Osborne at 13%. But I think all things considered, I slightly prefer Osborne just for taking on that bigger role, even though he's more expensive and getting higher ownership. You could convince me because Tyquan Thornton overall still more routes run on the year. He's only 1,600. You could convince me that he's a better play, but I think I'm slightly more inclined to go to KJ Osborne. All of them, though, I think Thornton pretty solid play at 9%, given the role he's had so far this year. I guess my biggest takeaway here is I think Pop Douglas. I'm sure that Pop Douglas is my favorite. The other three, you can kind of make a case for any of them. I think Jalen Polk is the most talented. He's also the most expensive. Going to get I assume, most ownership. Let me double check that. Where is the ownership on Polk? Yeah, 21%. Not terrible on Jalen Polk. Yeah, I think you can mix and match all three of Polk, Osborne, Tyquan Thornton. I like the ownership obviously better on Osborne. Yeah, for me it's going to be Pop Douglas. I think still Jalen Polk. That's still pretty low ownership, followed by Osborne, followed by Thornton. I think I'm sticking with that as my order. I don't feel really strongly, but I think all are pretty strong plays. You can really make a case for all of them. You can see why I'm struggling here just looking at the data. Like, not really clear. Thornton, bigger role than Osborne overall. Maybe a flippening. So hard to have a strong take there. The only one that I do have the real strong take about is Pop Douglas being my favorite, and even Pop Douglas could easily fail. It's just I think he has the best role, the best narrative, all of that in his favor. Outside of the receivers, so we have the tight ends and Hunter Henry. Man, what a role he has. So speaking of best role of the receivers on the Patriots on the season so far, Hunter Henry is leading in route participation. 86.9% route participation leads the Patriots, leading in targets by quite a bit, 14 targets. Number 2 is KJ Osborne with 8. All really strong for Hunter Henry. And on top of all that, going to be getting very little ownership because of his price tag being too high. Like his price tag is objectively too high for his role, 7.8K. But then as a result of that, 17% projected ownership in the flex. I really like it. I think Hunter Henry probably going to be one of my bigger stands. I think that we saw last week that he has at least the ability to be, a focal point of this offense. Last week, let's look at the numbers. 90%, 90.6% route participation for Hunter Henry. Saw 11 targets. So that is such an elite role. That's not what we think of with Hunter Henry. He's never really been that guy. He's never been a huge target earner. He's been pretty good for a tight end at times, but he's never been like the number one pass catching option. So far this season, he has been the number one pass catching option for the Patriots. And there's really no reason to think that they definitely won't continue that. He's been pretty good in that role. So I actually like paying up for Hunter Henry as a pay up to be contrarian spot. And even in the captain spot, I think that he is one of those I talk about wanting players that have big upside in the captain spot. I think he fits that bill. I think if you look at the 11 targets last week, say he does catch 10 targets, maybe he gets to 100 yards or scores 2 touchdowns. There are certainly ways for Hunter Henry to get there. The projected ownership at 2.4%. So at that number, given the role we saw last week, yeah, it's probably not sustainable, to be clear. I don't think he's likely to see 11 targets again in this game, but we know it's within the range of outcomes for him. So I do like Hunter Henry quite a bit. We'll have him in definitely more than the field. Definitely more than the amount that the field is projected to have of Hunter Henry. And then Austin Hooper, looking at what's the price tag there. Austin Hooper's at 2,400, projects for 3.3 fantasy points. And again, looking at his numbers from week 2, 9 routes run. Week 3, I'm reading this in reverse. Week 1, 14 routes run, down to 9 in week 2. I'm not overly concerned about that. I do like the overall route run numbers for Austin Hooper. 5 targets is third on the team behind Hunter Henry and KJ Osborne. So a pretty solid role for Austin Hooper. certainly could be involved in the red zone. Just a big tight end, often more involved in the red zone. It does have on 5 of his targets, 4 of them first read targets. So a lot of good indicators for Austin Hooper being a little bit involved in this offense. Also worth noting, so we talked earlier about the slots against the Jets and whether that's a thing. Just looking at the matrix from last year, just looking at the coverage matrix, Hunter Henry had the best expected fantasy points per route run. This is based on last year's numbers, but like the positions against the Jets. So his spot where he plays, where he lines up for the Patriots, has the most, actually second most behind Kendrick Bourne, who's not in this year. So of the active players, he had the best role in terms of expected fantasy points per route run against this defense. And I think the same kind of applies to Austin Hooper. So I do really like both of the Patriots tight ends here. I do think you could play them together. Got that question on the show this morning because they could easily, it could be Hunter Henry, again, has 8 receptions for 50 yards and a touchdown, and that's plenty in a low scoring game even for his salary. And then Austin Hooper, really cheap, so just 1 touchdown probably pays off his salary. So I think it is very possible for both of these tight ends to do well together. The negative correlation I don't think is all that strong because they both have roles on the team. All right. As far as the Jets go, we have Tyler Conklin is the number 1 tight end. Conklin, 2,800 projects for 6.3 fantasy points. I've said this before, I've really liked him in past showdown slates. Has not worked out at all. He, again, 61 receptions last year, 0 touchdowns last year. Maybe that is never going to regress at all, but I think it should. Just looking at the route participation, week 1, 77%, week 2, 70%. I think the route participation will continue to be there for Tyler Conklin. He will continue to be the leading tight end for the Jets. I think there is positive regression coming here, even with just 3 targets so far on the year. I think at some point, Aaron Rodgers is going to start looking his way. So I do like Tyler Conklin. Let me get rid of this bot. I'm going to be going back there again, but then I do think the ownership is a little bit high on Conklin. Looking at the flex ownership, we've got him at, actually that's not that high, 18.6%. I think that's reasonable. I think that is a reasonable number on Tyler Conklin. So actually, I like that. He's 3,200. The role is great other than the targets so far this year. And the targets were there last year. I have to think that they're going to be coming at some point. So I'm going to be going back to the Tyler Conklin well. You can join me if you want to. If you're tired of the Tyler Conklin well, I don't blame you for that. But 2,800, I think the price is fair for a guy who's running pretty significant routes for a tight end. You don't, some tight ends are only out there for 40%. It's really splitting. He's pretty clearly the tight end 1 for the Jets. So I do have some interest in Tyler Conklin. I don't think I'm going to go to Jeremy Ruckert. He has some role here. Would probably have some in a 150 set, but 9 total routes on the year, actually decreased from 7 in week 1 to 2 in week 2. Did he have 3 targets? Maybe we looked at this earlier. 3 targets in week 2 on 2 routes run. We did talk about that earlier. I'm still baffled by that number. Apparently had a target on a play that he was not actually running a route, but yeah, still 3 targets on 2 routes run. Although love that efficiency number. I don't think I'm going to be going to Jeremy Ruckert this week. Just occurred to me, I have not done my usual going running backs, receivers, tight ends. Apologies for those of you trying to follow along with the sidebar. We'll move on now to defenses and kickers. And this is going to be pretty chalky today. So let's take a look at the ownership on defenses and kickers. We've got the Jets defense coming in at 23% projected ownership in the flex. We have Greg Zuerlein, 20.5% projected ownership. Patriots defense, 19%. Joey Sly, 19%. So not getting these players at, can you call them players, at very low ownership. Kickers and defenses all coming in at least 19% ownership. That's just the flex. I think they're going to get some ownership at captain as well. Definitely makes sense though. Like these are generally going to be some of the better point per dollar players on the slate. In a low scoring game, we could see, just these four field goals being enough to be the optimal, even the optimal captain could be enough. So I understand why people are going to them as much as they are. And 3% projected captain ownership for the Jets. Hard to really argue. I don't know. I know people hate playing the kickers and defenses. I'm generally a fan of playing kickers and defenses, and I guess I'm just a hater, or but I'm cheering for the defense. So I'm just cheering for the opposite side of the game as everybody else. That's kind of the way that I like to go. So I think I will be playing a fair amount of kickers and defenses once again today. Um, it's tough because I think that this could be the rare game where they actually come in getting steamed. So I think that the ownership projections might be a little bit low, and if the ownership projections are low, at if we get up to Jets defense at 30%, I will be kicking myself if I play them, and I think that is within the range of possibilities. So I'm going back and forth. I think playing one of the group probably makes sense in a lot of lineups. I don't know that I'm going to have a ton of lineups that really lean into the kickers and defenses, because I think a lot of people will do that. Might do it a couple times, but I'm trying to get unique. So that's why I'm going to, for example, Jacoby Brissett at captain. I understand why people won't want to play Jacoby Brissett at captain. To be clear, he's put up 8 and 10 fantasy points so far this year, but I'd rather build unique lineups in that type of way, because I think going with this is going to be super low scoring kickers and defenses, probably not actually going to be extremely unique. Yeah, I think you can definitely play both defenses in the same lineup on FanDuel. Going to be relatively low owned there. Here, I'll actually pull up FanDuel here as well, so we can take a look at the ownership numbers on FanDuel on Roto Grinders. Error, please reload. So on FanDuel, we have, looking at the flex, Jets still at 21%, Patriots at 18. So they're going to be not low owned on FanDuel. Still, I think you can certainly do it. But you're using 2 of 5 roster spots on FanDuel, not really getting away from the chalk there. Let's take a look quickly at who are the more contrarian plays on FanDuel. I mean, KJ Osborne sub 10%. I do like that. Austin Hooper at 6% feels pretty strong on FanDuel. He seems like a good bet to potentially score a one-off touchdown. Honestly, not as many really low-owned flex options on FanDuel as usual. It's kind of spread out on FanDuel, so we don't have that super low-owned player. That actually here, I think I would prefer Tyquan Thornton over KJ Osborne. 6% is a really low number on a guy who's played more than 50% of routes both weeks so far. So he's probably my favorite, sub 10% owned guy, I think, on FanDuel. Now we also have KJ Osborne also pretty low there, so I don't feel that strongly about it, but I think both are strong plays. Conklin at 13% feels strong on FanDuel. Polk at 13%. Oh, Mike Williams at 13%. I love that on FanDuel. Lot of really, really strong plays over there on FanDuel as well. And that does bring us to the final portion of the program. I'll take some questions. I will build some lineups. So if you guys have any other questions that you want to ask before we start building a couple lineups, happy to do so. I would also on FanDuel, aren't they? Yeah, it's half PPR on FanDuel. That's correct. This could be the case. So you think Mike Williams is still limited in this game? I think that wouldn't be that shocking. Jets running game will struggle. Wouldn't be that shocking either. And Rodgers forced to air it out to Lazard and Wilson. All right, yeah. If you think that Mike Williams is not going to be good to go, still limited. I mean, I think he's still going to be limited in some capacity. I just think that he's going to maybe continue to take on a bigger role than last week, at least. All right. Any other? Let's see. All right, I need to get some mods in here apparently, because the bots are out today. Mike Williams two touchdowns guaranteed. You're saying you're guaranteeing Mike Williams 2 touchdowns? Then I would play him. If I knew for certain Mike Williams was going to score 2 touchdowns, I would play him in the captain spot. I think that would be enough on a low scoring game for Mike Williams to be the optimal captain. And I do think that he's a totally fine play at captain. He's the kind of big play guy that I like to play in captain, because I think he can pay off pretty easily. Sean says no quarterbacks in a DraftKings ladder. I think that's totally fine. I think that, on any slate, if you want to avoid all quarterbacks, this is one where it could just be there's not a lot of scoring. Quarterbacks need to score touchdowns to put up fantasy points. I mean, they get some for passing, but typically to put up, a good fantasy score, you're going to need to be throwing 1, 2, 3 touchdowns at the minimum. And this could be a game where we just don't get any passing touchdowns. So if you want to avoid all quarterbacks, I think that's totally fine on this slate. Favorite MVP on FanDuel. All right, let me take a look real quick. Do I still have that up? Or did I move it back? Yep, I still have it up. So let's go take a look at ownership. Now, this is the tough thing with FanDuel is the highest owned guys on FanDuel are the highest owned on for a good reason, because there's no salary multiplier. So whoever is the highest scoring player in your lineup is the player that you need to have in your MVP spot. So it's sort of hard to avoid the chalk on FanDuel to some extent. So I'm just looking for players that have the ability to be the highest scoring player in a lineup that are not chalky is generally just what I'm looking for on FanDuel. Aaron Rodgers sub 10% feels pretty good. Jacoby Brissett at 8% feels pretty good. So I'd say those two, some of my favorites. I actually think defenses coming in at 4% on FanDuel, half PPR. I like that a little bit better at 4% on FanDuel for Jets defense. I don't hate the idea of going with a defense. Patriots at 2% on FanDuel. I don't hate the idea. Just could have a pick six or something, low scoring game. It's a little bit tough. Mike Williams actually sub 2% on FanDuel. I think that's a pretty strong MVP play. It's a little bit thin. It's unlikely that Mike Williams is the highest scoring player on this slate, but it's possible. Ooh, Hunter Henry. Okay, that might be my favorite. Now he's a little bit of a PPR scam, I think. He's capable of. He's had some big plays in his NFL career, so maybe not entirely a PPR scam, but 1.63%. I think I found it. I think Hunter Henry is probably my favorite MVP on FanDuel. Just that number is too low for a player who was targeted 11 times last week, and we have no real reason to believe that they're going to go away from it this week. I mean, we're not that confident in the Patriots receivers. At least I'm not that confident in the Patriots receivers. I think against the Jets, you go to your most trusted receiving option. So I think Hunter Henry is a guy who could get a lot of targets once again this week. Maybe scores a touchdown or two. Could easily see him being the optimal MVP, the highest scoring player on the slate. I don't think it's, obviously, to be clear, not the likeliest scenario that he's the highest scoring player on the slate, but I think it's a greater than 1.63% chance for a player who was targeted 11 times last week. Yeah, that's smart. Team Ozone says, I'm here for the warm-up lineup announcements. Hopefully nothing too crazy today. Although it's been pretty profitable for us when we get that stuff. So I guess I wouldn't complain if we do get something weird in the warm-ups. That's a good question. Javad asks, what's the most salary you'd leave behind on a slate like this? I think this is a good opportunity to build a couple lineups to answer that question. Probably a significant amount, though, would be my guess. So let's go here into the Showdown slate. And this is not the largest field contest. Still 11,000, but I'm going to build this as though it's for the Millie Maker. So I've talked about doing the Brissett MVP thing. Again, not the likeliest outcome. I'm building this because I'm building for large field GPP. So if you're playing something smaller, would not advise Jacoby Brissett in the captain spot, but for like the Millie Maker type contest or the 500,000 first, whatever it is today, I think he's a strong MVP option in that contest. But then I would go immediately to Pop Douglas. I think now I probably go to Hunter Henry. Might even triple stack it with the Patriots. I do think, maybe I onslaught it with Ramondre. Or do I want Breece Hall in this one? I think I like the running backs somewhat better than Garrett Wilson. He is cheaper though. What can I get for 2,500? All right, so this is not a lineup that's leaving a ton of salary on the table. So I could put Austin Hooper here. That would be different. So there's a lineup that uses basically the full salary cap. Still probably low owned because it's a Patriots onslaught with Jacoby Brissett at MVP. But if we're trying to leave salary on the table, all right, let's try that. Let's go with I'm still gonna pay up at MVP, I think. Let's go with Hunter Henry. Let's go with Hunter Henry at MVP with Jacoby Brissett. But then we're going to go down to Patriots defense, Pop Douglas. Now, can I leave salary? So now the difficult thing here is I could afford to put in Garrett Wilson, Aaron Rodgers in this lineup. So can a different 2v2 beat that? So actually this might be let's put Breece Hall in there. You need at least one Jet in there. So now we can't afford. So I like that I can't afford Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson, or Ramondre Stevenson with my last spot. So I don't need this spot to outscore them. If I put Mike Williams in there, could I upgrade? I could upgrade Jacoby Brissett to any of Ramondre Stevenson, Garrett Wilson, or Aaron Rodgers. I think it's plausible for Jacoby Brissett to outscore that trio. So here we're leaving 2,700 on the table. And I think that this is a lineup that could plausibly win. I don't think there's any obvious upgrade from Mike Williams, who has like no shot of outscoring Pop Douglas. I don't think there's anybody that he couldn't possibly outscore. Patriots defense, I don't see anybody in this range. So this is the type of lineup that I like, where I'm leaving a significant amount on the table. I was going to say I think you could leave a ton of salary on the table. It is sort of tough just with we have Ramondre Stevenson, Breece Hall, and Garrett Wilson, and it feels pretty likely that two of those three are probably going to be in the winning lineup. I don't know. I think you could leave more salary than this on the table. Let's try one more where we're leaving a little bit more on the table. So let's say that it is a Mike Williams, Alan Lazard. Let's say it's the Patriots without Hunter Henry. I guess that would be one way to play it. So let's go Mike Williams scores a couple touchdowns. Going back to Pop Douglas, maybe scores one. KJ Osborne scores one. Jacoby Brissett, obviously one in there of both Pop Douglas and maybe they don't. Maybe they don't both score. Maybe Pop Douglas scores one. KJ Osborne has 6 receptions for 80 yards, and that's enough to make it into the optimal. So maybe you don't even need Brissett in this lineup. But it does get to the point where it's at some point it's like, well, how likely is it that Hunter Henry outscores Breece Hall? I think it's plausible that he could, but even then I put Hunter Henry in there. Now, I guess if I throw Breece Hall in here, so maybe that's fine. So could all of these players outscore Ramondre Stevenson, Garrett Wilson, Aaron Rodgers? You don't need all of them. You need Brissett, Henry, Breece Hall. Yeah, I think this is, so I'm leaving 4,700 on the table here. Clearly, the more salary you leave on the table, the more implausible the lineup becomes. This one feels kind of implausible. This is, I guess, you wouldn't want 2 touchdowns for Mike Williams here because you do need some of these players to outscore Aaron Rodgers. Maybe a touchdown and 100 yards to Mike Williams. Aaron Rodgers doesn't really spread the ball around. Maybe Breece Hall has 6 receptions for 40 yards on top of his running game. Maybe rushes one in. I think this is plausible. So here's leaving a significant amount on the table. There are some slates where I find it easier to leave more salary on the table. This one weirdly is like there's only 5 studs, but still I'm struggling a little bit. But I mean, you can play it. Let's build one more. So I think you can play it. So I've been avoiding doing like the Jets defense in the captain thing, but let's try one of those because I think that is where honestly you're probably leaving more salary on the table. Jets defense in the captain spot. And then instead of going to maybe Garrett Williams is covered, they go to wide receiver 2, Mike Williams. They go to, I mean, I've said you don't need to necessarily make a rule that you can't have Mike Williams with Alan Lazard. I think that's plausible. I don't know that I want to go there though. But then maybe the Patriots receivers. Could they all? How many Patriots receivers could reasonably outscore Garrett Wilson? I continue to struggle a little bit. Maybe we go Breece Hall. It's just a running game. Maybe the passing game just cannot get it done at all. So it's just running on both sides. And the Patriots are just running because they can't get anything going through the air. So we throw Antonio Gibson in there also. I think these two totally fine to play together, by the way. Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson. That is no issue with playing both of them. I just assume that the Patriots run a ton. And then, one of these Patriots receivers outscoring Hunter Henry wouldn't be that shocking. As much as I like Hunter Henry on this slate, I think that would be totally plausible. So maybe throw in actually, if we're trying to leave salary on the table, Tyquan Thornton, leaving 7,300 on the table. There are ways for it to hit with leaving a lot of salary on the table on this slate. Well, let's try one more where we're just leaving a reasonable amount on the table. I'm just going to build one more lineup here, and I would go Breece Hall. Probably is still my favorite captain on the slate. Not getting too weird, not going contrarian there, but going with Breece Hall. Just playing some of my favorite plays on the slate. I'd go Breece Hall, Tyler Conklin, Pop Douglas. Maybe throw in the Patriots defense. A lot of people are going to throw Breece Hall in the captain and immediately want to put the Jets defense in there because that's better correlation. But maybe throw in the Patriots defense, hope for pick six. Now we can go up to play Hunter Henry, Ramondre Stevenson. Bang, 1,700 left on the table. That to me looks like a very strong lineup for a large field GPP. Projects well. You've got Breece Hall in the captain spot. He's projects really well in the captain spot. You've got a high projection on Ramondre Stevenson. Hunter Henry only needs to outscore Jacoby Brissett. Doesn't need to outscore Aaron Rodgers or Garrett Wilson because you don't have enough salary left over for them to replace him. Patriots defense, I think, can outscore everybody up to 6,100. Ditto Pop Douglas up to 5,900. Conklin up to 4,500. So I think this is the type of lineup that I really like for a large field GPP. We're leaving 1,700 on the table. Doesn't project poorly. You can obviously make a case for how this works out. And it's going to be not duped all that much because we're leaving 1,700 on the table. So there is an example of the type of lineup I like to play in a large field GPP when I'm just hand building a lineup for it. Okay. Take on Jacoby is he's probably not that good. I understand why nobody wants to play him, and I will be above weight to the field on Jacoby in the captain spot because not many people are going to do it. Football is a weird game where just outlier plays happen all the time. So Jacoby in the captain spot with multiple pass catchers, I think is one way that I'm going to build tonight to get different from the field, even though, again, I don't think it's the likeliest outcome. I think it's for large field GPPs. I think it's an interesting way to build. And you only have two quarterback options. Quarterbacks generally have the highest floor, among the highest ceilings, at least. All right, go no quarterback. Sean said, did I just do that? I think I just did no quarterback, right? Yep. So there's a no quarterback build. So got that one out of the way. All right, I'm realizing I should probably go build my lineups. Get rid of this bot. Amon Deep says volume. Is my volume, has it been an issue? Haven't heard people complain. Anyway, I got to get going. Go make some lineups. Let me know if there are issues with my volume or anything like that. Always appreciate that. But I got to go make my lineups. Appreciate all of you for hanging out. Again, if you haven't done so, please do subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to grow this meager little channel. Appreciate all of you guys supporting me this year. It's been really awesome, the amount of support I've got. So appreciate you all. Please like, subscribe, comment. All of that is very much appreciated. I'm going to go make some lineups. Let's win some money tonight. Good luck, guys.